afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, no literary festival works without its sponsors, and I'm really pleased that Lynn Narroway from Seabourn Cruises, who is sponsoring this event, is here just to say a few words before we start.
Thank you. Seabourn, absolutely delighted to be involved with the Isle of Wight Literary Festival for the first time this year, and even more delighted to be able to sponsor Gyles. My husband and I absolutely adore him on Radio 4. Well, Gogglebox, what can we say? And I think next year, Gyles, you need a sweater with the IWLF logo on it. So absolutely. I think we'll sort that out for you. Seabourn, we love our Seabourn conversationalists. We love sharing stories on all our cruises. And as I say, it's an absolute delight to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Lynn. All regulars at the Literary Festival will probably know me as someone who does some of the interviews. But what you won't know is that our guest today and I go back a long, long way. We both shared an office in the House of Commons back in the 90s. And also with us was Sebastian Coe, now Lord Coe and President of World Athletics. And I can tell you for 2 years, we didn't stop laughing. It was the best time of my life, and perhaps we might just talk about it a minute. Anyway, I'm thrilled to welcome Gyles here today. He's a well-known broadcaster, as Lynn has just said. And I'm able to say that he works closely. His podcast includes Something Rhymes with Purple, all about words and language, which he presents with Susie Dent and Rosebud. Susie is here tomorrow, by the way, in which he talks to famous people about their early memories. He's married to writer and publisher Michelle Brown and has 3 children, 6 grandchildren, and a cat called Nala, who is actually the neighbor's cat. We give a warm welcome to Gyles Brandreth.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Before I tell you how excited and delighted I am to be back with my friend Richard, and indeed with his child bride, Nikki, I have to say how thrilled I am to be here on the Isle of Wight again. I was amused that Lynn made reference to Gogglebox. This is a television program which, for me, sums up what has become of our society. Gogglebox, if you don't know it, is a program where basically we are watching people on television who are watching television. That is what the world has come to. I appear on something called Celebrity Gogglebox. And I've been doing this for about 6 years. They call it Celebrity Gogglebox. I have to say they use the word celebrity quite loosely. I've certainly not heard of any of the other people involved. I began doing it with Sheila Hancock. You know what I mean by Sheila Hancock? Dame Sheila Hancock. Wonderful lady, now 91 years of age. She, I think, was here at this festival last year. She's full of fun, fire, she's feisty, she's fabulous. And we did a Canals series together, and then we were asked to do Celebrity Gogglebox. And it was at the beginning of the pandemic. And I have to say how strange it was to find me with this lady, this vintage lady. You know, she was then approaching her 90s. I'm of riper years. The pair of us were sitting on a sofa during a global pandemic, watching television for Celebrity Gogglebox, sitting there week by week, gradually realizing that during this global pandemic, the two of us, we mature people, were sitting on a sofa week by week, gradually getting hooked on a program called Naked Attraction. And because, as I explained, Sheila was then nearly 90, her eyesight is beginning to go, so we had to move the sofa closer to the screen. Now, the reason I'm here is because I love the Isle of Wight. I was thrilled when I heard I was going to be sharing the platform with Richard, because we are old friends. We had very happy times together at Westminster. But the Isle of Wight holds a special place in my heart for a variety of reasons. I've come here over many years. I think I first came here the year of the coronation. Not the last coronation, the one before, in 1953. My sister Hester lived here, and indeed she died here. She worked at Parkhurst Prison as a drugs rehabilitation officer, but she also had a guest house here, and indeed we can remember her, you can all go and remember her, by visiting Colwell Common, and the bench by the bus stop has a little plaque in her memory. So I love coming here for that, and for memories of the great Cameron photographer, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Queen Victoria, McGill the cartoonist. But I come here principally because I like to go to an independent bookshop. And there is no better independent bookshop than Medina in the High Street here in Cowes. Yeah. Yay!
Well, thank you for that, Gyles. You've actually asked to talk about a number of books, actually, but let us start with The 7 Secrets of Happiness, An Optimist's Journey. Tell us, what's behind this book? Why did you write it? Are you a happy person?
I am today. In anticipation of you lovely people supporting the bookshop that you applauded so enthusiastically, after the talk is given, because around the corner we'll be flogging books. I want to explain this. I actually ought to explain this. The reason I'm still writing books, and the reason I'm writing the happiness book, and indeed Pros and Cons we're going to come on to, is this. I need the money. Michelle and I, we have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. And we've discovered over the years that money is the one thing keeping us in touch with them. And I also have to tell, because we are good grandparents, we do attempt to help a little bit with the school fees. So I have been here before, but I'm really relying on you to ensure that this year I sell 20% more books than I did last time.
Well,
to answer your question, happiness. The truth is, and you don't have this feeling that I had, in 1997, I lost my seat.
yes.
You retained yours, didn't you?
True.
I lost my seat, and you stepped down when you left Parliament, didn't you? You were never defeated.
Correct. But
So-
nearly 20 years after you left.
Yes, but the point is, you kept being elected.
Yes.
With me, they had one go and spat me out. I only lasted 1 term. Obviously, by the time I lost my seat, by then I knew I had contempt for my constituents. But it came as a bit of a shock to the system to find the feeling was entirely mutual. And it didn't help that my darling wife put our house in the constituency up for sale during the election campaign.
And that made you unhappy?
Yes. Well, no, on every other house it said, vote Brandreth, vote Brandreth, vote Brandreth. On our house it said, for sale. I said to Michelle, this is not sending out quite the right signal. She said, Gyles, the signal is immaterial. These people really don't like you. And though you know you're going out with a swing, and it was, 1997 was a huge swing against our party. It was inevitable, in my case, because I was in a marginal seat. But nonetheless, you take it personally. They say to you, you shouldn't take it personally, but you do. So I did feel rejected. And it had been a difficult year. Anyway, my father had died that year. Well, he was of an age. But my sister had died, the one who lived on the Isle of Wight, had died, and she was only 62. My brother died, he was only 52. And my best friend from school, some of you may remember him, an actor called Simon Cadell, appeared in Heidi High, yeah? He died that same year. So I had all these deaths, my father, my sister, my brother, Simon, my darling wife, of course, she just soldiered on. Anyway, so I had all this, and I'd been rejected. And I thought, well, I was feeling low. And I thought I must do something about this. So I was listening one Sunday morning to the radio, Radio 4, and I heard a lovely Irishman talking on a program called In the Psychiatrist's Chair. And I thought, this man sounds like a wise person. And I thought, I'm going to go to see him. And he was called Dr. Anthony Clare. He turned out to be the chief psychiatrist, the head of the psychiatric hospital in Dublin. And I flew over to Dublin, made an appointment, went to see him. And I said, I'm looking for the elixir of happiness. I ought to be happy, and I'm not. Can you help? He said, well, if it's an elixir you're after, it's not a bad place to start, Dublin. And I said, I'm serious. And I told him about my father dying. And he said, well, sit down in the psychiatrist's chair. And I did. And he said, tell me about your parents. When were they happy? And I said, well, curiously, my parents, who of a certain vintage, I said, my parents sometimes talked about being happy during the Second World War. And during the Second World War, my mother was living in London, and bombs were falling in London at that time, in a flat in Blackheath, with my 3 elder sisters. My sisters were born all at the beginning of the war. I was born a few years after the war. So my sisters were little babies, and my mother was living in this flat. My father was away in the army, and bombs were falling. And yet she talked about it as a happy time. And my father sometimes referred to the war as a happy time. And he, for 6 years, was in the army. I said, explain that to me, Dr. Clare. He said, it's quite easy to explain. He said, certainly bombs were falling on your mother during the Second World War, but in London at that time, there was a sense of community, a sense of common purpose, shared values, and that makes people very happy indeed. And your father, yes, the soldiers, the sailors, the airmen, risking their lives on a daily basis during the Second World War, they were doing that. But also, throughout the Second World War, they were being tested. And all the research shows that being tested, being challenged, is a key element to finding happiness. You very rarely find people sitting around not doing very much who are happy. An engagement with life, being tested, being challenged, is key to happiness. And I thought, oh, this is very intriguing. And I thought there's more to this man than I realized. So I began asking him other questions. I said to him, for example, do rich people, are they going to be happier than poor people? He said, no, funnily enough, not necessarily. Of course, you need enough to live on, to not be worried about starvation. He said, but very rich people often are not nearly as happy as averagely off people. And I said, what about beautiful people? Do the beautiful people get to be happier than the not? He said, no, quite the reverse. Human beings find extremes of any kind quite difficult to cope with. So if you are wonderfully beautiful, you may find it difficult to form relationships. Marilyn Monroe, very beautiful, but not personally very happy. If you're more homely looking, you're going to be happier than if you're incredibly beautiful, which I have to say, from where we are standing, looking out of this crowd, you're in luck. So, with Anthony Clare, I began to develop, and it's ended up in this little book, The 7 Secrets of Happiness, I began to develop this 7 Secrets of Happiness, and they do work. Happy people will live longer than unhappy people. I'll just share a couple of them with you now, and then let you ask your next question. Because they're in a sense relevant to this group. There's 7 secrets, and if you can live by them all, you will be happy. The first of them is one in a way I've almost mentioned already. It's to be a leaf on a tree. What does that mean, to be a leaf on a tree? Well, we're all unique. Every individual in the world is unique, just as every leaf on every tree is unique. A leaf off a tree, when it feels free, it floats about a bit. That's quite exciting. But it quite quickly floats to the ground and it dies. We need to be a leaf on a tree, attached to an organism that is larger than ourselves and still growing. It's key to being happy. You've got to be attached to something bigger than you and it's still got a life. It could be a school. It could be a college like this. It could be being a volunteer at the Isle of Wight Literary Festival. Seriously, you need to be part of something that is bigger than you. It could be a choir, a golf club. Easier for young people because they are at school. They're part of a family. More difficult as you grow older. You may become a widow or a widower. Your children may be living in Australia. You may not belong to so many groups. To be a leaf on a tree is quite challenging to sustain that. But you need to do that to be happy. And the second of the 7 secrets, I'll only mention 2, because otherwise you won't want to buy the book to find out the other 5. And this is relevant to what we need to talk about, is to cultivate a passion. Have something in your life that you love doing. Now, with you, I think it's probably your boat, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, that is a passion that has sustained you ever since I've known him. He's been keen on these boats. And I can't say that I am, but with a seaborne cruise, it's different. But we need something in our lives that keeps us going, something to fall back on when times are hard, a passion in life. And we were talking earlier on about Margaret Thatcher, because who's coming this afternoon?
And we got Norman Farrar coming, who is one of Margaret Thatcher's key cabinet ministers. And he's going to talk about his time with Margaret Thatcher and indeed with John Major.
Well, Margaret Thatcher is relevant to this because her passion in life was politics. And when politics was denied her, when she ceased to be Prime Minister in 1990, she had nothing left to fall back on. Yeah. And one of the things you're going to discover from Norman Fowler's book is how she couldn't let go because she had nothing else in her life.
Yep.
And all she had was politics. And as the years went by, as that was denied her, she had no other resources. And Michelle and I were lucky enough to know her. And particularly towards the end of her life, she was quite a sad person because politics was everything. And particularly after her husband Dennis died, she was quite isolated and she no longer had politics that had been her driving passion. I mean, I found her, she was a remarkable person, our first woman Prime Minister, not much sense of humour. Do you remember that? That was the only downside, was that really no sense of humour. I always felt that must have made bringing up Mark quite challenging. Anyway, Mrs. Thatcher had that one passion, politics, and died not very happy. Now think of another lady, equally distinguished, more distinguished. Anyone possible to be more distinguished than Margaret Thatcher? Yes, the late Queen, Elizabeth II. Born the same year as Mrs. Thatcher, back in 1926. They're born same vintage, two women the same vintage. The Queen, though, Elizabeth II, as we know, driven by duty, sustained by faith, duty and faith, everything to her, faith particularly, but made happy all her life by her passion for her dogs and her horses. If you want to see a picture of pure happiness, Google a photograph of the late Queen at a race meeting on the day one of her horses won a race. You will see a picture of happiness. Her dogs and her horses were everything to her. As the Duke of Edinburgh once said to me, if it doesn't fart or eat hay, she isn't interested. And as you know, the late Queen, she died 2 years ago, back in September the 8th, 2 years ago. And you'll remember, 2 days before she died, there was that photograph taken of her on her last day of duty. In the morning, she was doing duty. She was saying goodbye to one Prime Minister and welcoming another. That has long been misunderstood, incidentally. I should mention this in passing. As a political animal, you will appreciate this. People have misunderstood this. The late government deliberately has been rushing through these prime ministers on purpose to enable Elizabeth II to be in the Guinness Book of Records. If they'd not rushed through those prime ministers, Queen Victoria would have been the sovereign with the most prime ministers. Thanks to the beneficence of the last government, they rattled through prime minister after prime minister in order to ensure Elizabeth II's place in... So that would, if only they'd explained that properly...
Precisely.
We wouldn't have had the general election result we have and the consequent buyer's regret that we're now suffering from. But that's by the by. So, but the point is, in the morning the Queen was doing her duty and she enjoyed her work, but she was happy because in the afternoon she watched in a 2 o'clock race one of her horses win a race 2 days before she died. What a way to go, age 96. So the point is, you need to cultivate a passion. And my passion is words, which may lead us on to another book.
Gyles, thank you. That was a really tough interview I did on... But I'm delighted that Gyles is also going to talk about his most recent book, published only a couple of weeks ago, Prose Cons, The English Language in Just a Minute. And Gyles takes you on a magical mystery tour of our mother tongue, from the origins of words, correct grammar, and punctuation to similes, euphemisms, and record-breaking tongue twisters, all delivered in 60-second installments without hesitation, repetition, or deviation. We'll put him to the test in a minute. But Gyles, where did this book come from? I mean, we all know you from Just a Minute.
It comes really from my passion for words.
Yeah.
Words, you have your boat, you have sailing as a passion. I have words and language as a passion.
Go on.
Yes?
I was going to say, the first chapter is really interesting about the origin of words and the history of the English language. And, you start with the Old English pre-1066, Middle English, Norman to 1500, printing presses, the Great Vowel Shift, and then modern language. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Language is everything. As Bertrand Russell, the great philosopher, said, no matter how eloquently a dog may bark, he cannot tell you that his parents were poor but honest. Only words can do that. And that's why I've been fascinated by language always, since I was a little boy and went to a prep school. I wasn't there very long. I was just there until the staff were all arrested and the school was closed down. But actually, that's an exaggeration. The staff weren't all arrested, and actually the one who should have been wasn't, but that's by the by. He was just sent to the local girls' school where he might do less harm. Things were done differently in those days. Let's move on. But that's when I discovered my love of language as quite a small boy. And the history of our language, the evolution of our language, is completely fascinating. And the international nature of our language, of the English language, described by Emerson as a great river into which so many tributaries flow. You mentioned euphemisms, and Susie Dent is coming tomorrow, she also said. When I did the Canal series with Sheila Hancock, I got a postcard from Susie Dent. I don't know if any of you, yes, you will know what postcards are. No, I was talking to some university students recently. They did not know what a postcard was. Seriously. Yeah. And she sent me a postcard saying, oh, you're going on this trip with Sheila. Happy gongoozling. I thought, is this some euphemism? So I phoned her up and I said, Sheila's coming up for 91. There'll be no gongoozling, I assure you. And she said, it's not a euphemism, you silly fool. Don't you know the word? I said, I don't know the word. And it's a medieval word, fascinating. It means to gongoozle is to gaze longingly on still water. It's what fisher folk doing. You're gongoozling. It's a lovely word. So discovering new words, discovering the English language and all its variety is fantastic. You chuckle that people don't remember postcard. Young people have no idea what a telegram was. You do know you remember telegrams, don't you?
Shut up.
Well, when Michelle and I first met in 1968, I bombarded her with telegrams. There will be some younger people who may not know what a telegram is. Basically, it's like a text message. It was typed up, and the piece of paper was cut out and then was put on a little buff-coloured paper, folded in two, put in a little envelope, and then a boy on a bicycle, often with the uniform buttons up the front, little hat to one side, got on the bicycle and came round and delivered it to your door. It's virtually incredible that happened, but you could send several telegrams a day, which I did to Michelle. I was going to say some of them were quite fruity. They weren't, because you had to actually phone up and tell the telephonist what you were. And in America, they had singing telegrams. Now, when I was telling the students this, they could not believe it. They just about got their head around the idea of a telegram, which was a personally delivered text message. They understood that, but a singing telegram. And I don't know if they had them in the UK, but they were very big in America. And during my gap year, did you go to the States?
Yes.
Yes, I felt you did. I went to the States during my gap year, and I was at a birthday party in California. A woman was having her 40th birthday. I was about 19. And she was tipsy. And I remember the telegram boy arrived with this telegram, And she said, "Oh, the telegram boy's here. Hush, everyone. Sing the telegram, sing the telegram." And the boy said, "I don't want to sing the telegram." And she said, "No, it's my birthday. You will sing that telegram." And the boy said, "I don't want to sing the telegram." She said, "My birthday, you sing." So the poor boy stepped forward, opened the telegram, and sang as follows. "Tra-la-la-la-la-la, your sister Rose is dead." So the idea with the book is to celebrate every aspect of this extraordinary thing, the English language, which is the richest language in the world, which is now more spoken as a second language than as a first language. It is, if you'll pardon the expression, the lingua franca of civilization. We are so blessed that our parent tongue, as we now call our mother tongue, we are now so blessed that our parent tongue is universal. It's incredible. And I think we can thank, among others, we should maybe thanking William Shakespeare. It's extraordinary that this small island, our language, has conquered the world. And one of the reasons it's conquered the world is it's not tried to be insular. The French language has tried to stay insular. They don't want, we've got at least 500,000 words in the Oxford English Dictionary, and as many, again, technical terms, but 500,000 words are at our disposal. The French, fewer than 100,000. And that includes le weekend and le snack bar. So we have this wonderfully rich language because it isn't pure. It's a mongrel tongue. You know, we borrowed bungalow from India. We take words from Giza, from Iceland. We take words from anywhere, and the language is evolving. You're right. The book does begin with the beginnings of the language.
Does the internet influence it?
Yes. And to our benefit, one of the seven secrets of happiness is not to resist change.
Yes.
And I am quite naturally a conservative person. I believe if it's not necessary to change, it's necessary not to change. I'm a traditional conservative in that sense. But Anthony Clare and Susie Dent, between them, taught me this, that actually change is inevitable. Anthony Clare said, actually, change is the salt in the soup of life. If you resist change, you will be unhappy. Change is part and parcel of being alive, and to fight it all the way. And I don't like change. I have to tell you, I do not wish to learn another frigging password. I'm sorry. I mean, we were in Ely yesterday. We went to the supermarket, to the little Waitrose light, put down the shopping basket, unidentified object in bagging area. F off. But we are wrong. We are wrong to resist change. My mother was marvelous. She embraced change, you know. She lived to be 96, like my friend Nicholas Parsons. We'll come on to him in just a minute in a moment. Like the Queen, good age, 96. And she lived to be 96. She had a difficult last year because of that bath she bought. Do you see these baths advertised? I'm so glad they're not sponsoring us. Seaborn, yay! But you know those baths that are with doors in the side, you know, that you can get into if you're of riper years. And I see these advertisements, the back of colour supplements. There's always this sort of lady in a one-piece bathing costume with sort of silver hair sitting on the edge of the bath. I never knew that. Does Nikki wear a bathing costume in the bath?
No. You've had a sheltered life, obviously.
Well, there we are. I've seen these photographs. They always seem to be wearing bathing costumes on the edge of the bath. Anyway, my mother was persuaded to buy one of these baths. You know, she's in her 90s. She buys a bath. Anyway, she gets into it. She's thrilled with it. Avocado colour. And to match the bidet. And she's in this bath, lovely sudsy water. Oh, she's really enjoying it. Then she opens the door on the side, floods the bathroom. So She embraced change, and you need to embrace change. AI is something I resist and have reservations about. I'm not so sure that I'm right. I had a conversation the other day with a lovely man called Chris McCausland. If you're following Strictly Come Dancing, you'll know who he is. Chris McCausland is a friend of mine, been a friend of Michelle's and mine for about 10 years. He's a comedian who is blind and is currently on Strictly Come Dancing. He's also a delightful human being. And I now do a podcast called Rosebud. And Rosebud has become hugely successful because of the caliber of people we have as guests, from literally Dame Judi Dench through to Sir Keir Starmer. Last week we had an interview, an old interview that I had done with Dame Maggie Smith on Rosebud this week. So we have all sorts of remarkable people talking about their first memories. And when I had Chris McCausland on a few weeks ago, I was banging on about AI and the disadvantages of it. And he said, stop, stop, stop. He said, don't knock AI without thinking about it. He said, because it's thanks to AI that I can now see my wife. I said, I'm sorry, explain. He said, well, if I asked you, Gyles, to describe my wife to me, you'd say, oh, she's looking very nicely. She's got a smile on. She's got blonde hair, nice eyebrows. She's not wearing glasses. She's got... He said, that doesn't describe her. That's just sort of generic. AI can tell me in the closest detail exactly what my wife looks like. AI has shown me what my wife looks like. My daughter comes in from school. AI looks at the picture she did at school that day and then describes it to me in detail. Every color, every part of the picture. AI can do amazing things. That made me think, oh, I must not resist change. And it's the same with the language. So the internet, yes, has brought new words in. I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I have had a hot girl summer. And being with you, I don't feel at all ick.
Ladies and gentlemen, this book is full of stories. I mean, it's done in the just a minute style. And joke after joke, story after story, something interesting comes out. And I wonder if you could just tell us the one about anagrams and palindromes. And if you remember James Thurber's conversation with his nurse.
Oh, remind me.
James Thurber was in hospital, and he asked a nurse who was looking after him what 7-letter word has 3 U's in it. And she replied, after thinking very hard, I don't know, but it must be very unusual. Get it?
I love anagrams. Ars Magna, the great art, Ars Magna, rearranges anagrams. You can take almost any word you like. Let's challenge you now, because you're bright. And if not, Nikki can give you the answer, as she has been doing for the last 40 years. Take the word Monday, M-O-N-D-A-Y, and rearrange those 6 letters, that everyday English word, Monday, into another everyday English word, Richard. M-O-N-D-A-Y. M-O-N-D-A-Y.
There you go.
Anyone know? Dynamo! Exactly. Isn't that interesting? It's fun to play with words.
Yes.
I'm a great enthusiast for people like Lewis Carroll, who love this sort of thing. I think his included an anagram for Florence Nightingale was flit on, cheering angel. Margaret Thatcher. You can turn Margaret Thatcher into either that great charmer, depending on your point of view, or Meg, the arch Tartar. So wordplay, I think, is terribly important. I should have mentioned, and you did actually, that the reason I'm wearing this jumper is that it's a clock for doing it just a minute. The book was a real challenge because the publisher said, you love words and language. Last year, you did this big serious book about the Queen, Elizabeth II, an intimate portrait, which is a really, a substantial book of which I'm very proud because it was based on conversations with the Queen and people who worked with her and for her. Remind me in a moment to tell you a story about the Queen and Mrs. Thatcher.
Yes.
If you don't mind.
Well, why not?
Well, I'll do it in a second when I finish this bit. Because do remind me, because you've got to do something. They said, do something more fun this year, something, that can be more of a gift book, more expensive, just a fun book. We can put cartoons in it. The English language. I said, well, I've done the English language before. They said, no. Combine the English language with just a minute. And so the challenge in this book is there are, as you mentioned, all these different subjects. and I try to write about them in 60 seconds. The equivalent of, which could be anything from 300 words to 600 words. 600 words if you're Kenneth Williams on a roll, 300 words if you're Clement Freud trying to beat the clock. So that's what it is. It was incredibly difficult to do, to actually write. The deviation, I think I got away with. The hesitation didn't really occur because I was actually writing it, and so could make sure that hesitations didn't appear in the book. But repetition was quite difficult. It's a BBC book. Couldn't say that. British Broadcasting Corporation, you can't repeat the B. So it was very challenging indeed.
Okay, Gyles, we've got 60 seconds to the next book. Pick a subject, talk about for 60 seconds, but 60 without hesitation, repetition, or deviation.
Nicholas Parsons, one of the great figures in my life, and I first encountered this gentleman at a party given by Fanny Craddock. How to describe this extraordinary lady married to Johnny simply to a modern audience? I suppose she was a curious cross between Mary Berry and Jeremy Clarkson. There was something beautiful about her and tough about her at the same time. And at a party that she gave, there, among the guests were Lionel Blair, that's Tony's dad, and our hostess. I arrived, in fact, and said, "Oh, look, it's Butch Casserole and the One Dance Kid." Well, we had a laugh about that, but at this celebration, who should there be but none other than my friend Nick P. Note, no repetition there of his name in full. And we had haven't I got through the 60 seconds?
You've got 20 seconds left.
Oh my gosh, well, on we go. And he was delightful. This was when Michelle and I were 18 or 19 years of age, and we were invited to this Christmas celebration by this wonderful television chef. And there were the stars of stage and screen, including the person who ultimately became... Thank you very much.
Boing. I did detect a bit of hesitation.
Yeah,
actually,
there was
but,
lots of hesitation.
So I think the prize goes to Nicholas Parsons.
It does. What's interesting is that it's very difficult to do that unless you're playing the game.
Yes.
I've been playing Just a Minute on the radio now since the 1980s. It's been running for more than 50 years. And when I began doing it, it had people like Kenneth Williams, Clement Freud, Peter Jones, Derek Nimmo. And I'm still doing it when it has a different cast. In fact, I was doing it last Sunday on Radio 4, and I think I'm again in this series later on in the series. And I love doing it. I particularly like doing it with Paul Merton because we're both very competitive, and it's quite it works when you're there against the clock, the adrenaline rush. You really focus. When you're doing it in a more relaxed way, you don't concentrate in the same way, and it's challenging too because, quite rightly, they want to bring new people on board, but then you have to hold back a bit in order to let them give it a go. And I love Sue Perkins, who is the new host who plays the game brilliantly. So the idea of the English language in Just a Minute is simply to create exactly that, a book that you can put in the... Basically, it's a book, to be honest with you, that you can give to people you don't know or like. No. Because it's really a problem. You know, there's the son-in-law who's been part of the family for 30 years. You never quite knew why she married him anyway. But he's stuck around. You've got to think of something for him this Christmas, haven't you? Well, this is the book to give him. Because, no, frankly. And so, and when I sign them, and I will sign them, I'm very happy to put Merry Christmas, whatever the name is. And then sign it. And I'm not proud. If there's some of you hoping for a resale on eBay, I can also sign, J.K. Rowling. Anything that will be helpful to you.
But before we get on to questions from the audience,
questions from the audience.
Deciding, yes, I think they may want to ask you one or two things. Should we just have a quick word about this?
Yeah.
Your autobiography of the late Queen. This is a highly detailed book. Just where on earth did you get all the data from?
I had already... This is a big book and a serious book. I was lucky enough to get to know the late Duke of Edinburgh, a remarkable man who I admired, one of my heroes. Most of my heroes are people who keep going on, right to the end of the road, People like Her Late Majesty, like Nicholas Parsons, like Judi Dench, with whom I'm doing a show in York on Thursday evening, who's in her, well, she's going to be 90 later this year. People who just keep going and who have an attitude to life that is outward looking. And indeed, the late Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, they lived by the 7 secrets of happiness, one of which is break the mirror. Don't think about yourself. Stop thinking about yourself. Don't talk about yourself. Don't think about yourself. Look up, look out at the world outside you. It's more interesting that way. Look in, look down, you'll get depressed eventually. Look up, look out, you'll see sunshine. You'll see birds, you'll see nature. Even in a gallery, you'll see beautiful paintings. Experience life to the full. Look up, look out, don't look down, and don't look in. So I got to know the Duke of Edinburgh because I became involved when I was in my 20s in a charity called the National Playing Fields Association. And he was the very active president of that. So I first got to know Seb Coe, in fact, because Seb was involved in that charity too. And through getting to know him, I inevitably came to meet the Queen. I'd first met her in 1968 on the 2nd of May, because I can tell you the date because I keep a diary. And on that first occasion, I realized I was a student at Oxford and she came in to visit the Oxford. And when she came into the room, I realized how the atmosphere changed. And there was always an invisible moat around the Queen. And I thought how strange it must be to be this person about whom there is this invisible moat. No one was ever quite normal with the Queen, though she was always totally herself with everybody. And I found her fascinating, and I wrote, obviously, because I keep a diary, about that encounter and every subsequent encounter. And over the years, I met her on many occasions and always wrote about it. Quite difficult in a way for me because I didn't know anything about dogs and horses. And so making conversation with her would have been easy if I'd known about dogs and horses because that's what she loved and talked about comfortably. So I had to think of subjects to talk to her about that might intrigue her. And we talked about a whole variety of things over the years, including, well, the war. Talked a lot about the war, actually. And I'll tell you 2 quick stories. I asked her about the war years. Must have been meeting at a thing around Armistice Day. That's why the conversation came around to the war. And I asked her what she remembered best. And she mentioned Winston Churchill first. And clearly Winston Churchill loomed large in her life because he had been her first prime minister. And she was only 25 years of age when she became queen. And Winston Churchill was this great elder statesman whom she'd known since she was a little girl. At Balmoral in the late 1920s, Winston Churchill had actually sat her on his knee. And during the Second World War, Winston Churchill and her father, King George VI, were very close and worked together. And she clearly admired him. She only went to 2 prime ministers' funerals during her long reign, those of Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher.
Really?
Intriguing. People used to say, or the Daily Mail used to say, that they didn't get on. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. But there is this rather charming story of the first time Mrs. Thatcher went to see the Queen as Prime Minister. When Mrs. Thatcher was elected, she went to Buckingham Palace to formally kiss hands on her appointment as Prime Minister. And I was told this story by the equerry on duty that day, because as well as the book being conversations with the Queen, with the Duke of Edinburgh, with their children and family, and with people who worked closely with her, there were others like equerries who told me stories. And on that day, Mrs. Thatcher arrived at Buckingham Palace, and the equerry was there to greet her and said, "Congratulations, Prime Minister. Her Majesty is looking forward to seeing you." And they were walking along the corridor. And as they were walking along the corridor, the equerry said to Mrs. Thatcher, "Prime Minister, you're about to meet Her Majesty. It's customary when you meet the Queen formally like this to curtsy. It's by no means obligatory. Her Majesty won't even note it." Mrs. Thatcher interrupted and said, "Of course, I'm planning to curtsy. I'm prepared to curtsy. It's not a problem. I will be curtsying." So they go into the room where the Queen is waiting. The equerry steps forward and says, "Your Majesty, the Prime Minister, Your Majesty." And he steps back. At which point, Mrs. Thatcher steps forward and executes the most brilliant, beautiful, low curtsy you can imagine. Margaret Thatcher, new Prime Minister, goes right down to the ground with this wonderful formal curtsy. Margaret Thatcher goes right down to the ground in this curtsy, right down to the ground, where she stays. She then throws a desperate glance towards the equerry, who beetles forward and tries to get her up. But he can't get her up, so from the other side, Queen Elizabeth II comes and hoists her up. True story, and you heard it first on the Isle of Wight.
We just got a couple more minutes before we throw it to the floor. Going full circle, Gyles, one of the things that made you very happy was your time in Parliament. And you have actually written about it in a book, Breaking the Code. And it was mainly about your time well, it wasn't about your time, it's partly about your time in the Whip's office, and you slightly referred to me in it as well. Just what made you happy in Parliament?
Well, partly, of course, being a leaf on a tree and having a passion. My passion then was politics, being a leaf on a tree. I didn't resist change because change is inevitable. So the elements of being a happy person were there. I'm a people person. And one of the things I realize about the best of politics is it is about people. In your constituency, it's about the problems that people bring to you and the people that you meet and become friends with. In Parliament, it's the people that you meet and become friends with. We wouldn't have known each other if it hadn't been for being in politics. And being in the Whip's office, which is a much misunderstood world. The reason the book is called Breaking the Code is I keep a diary, and it is a diary of basically wanting to be an MP, going through the selection process, finding a seat, being elected, the travails, and then trying to climb the greasy pole, in my case, ending up in the Whip's office and writing about that. And at the time, nobody before had written about the workings of the Whip's office, and that's why the book was controversial. And I broke the Whip's code in writing about it. I think now I have been forgiven, but at the time, I don't think I was forgiven, and I was breaking the code. My justification was that we were paid, we were government ministers in the Whip's office, and therefore it's in the public domain. And, you know, I felt it could be, should be, and could be, and was shared. But I loved it. And Parliament is to me a useful place. And in my experience, most MPs are good people. And across the board, we're now in an island where there are representatives of two political parties on this island. In almost inconceivable, but it has happened. So there we are. But actually, MPs from different parties can get on. You can actually be in the tea room of the House of Commons, and you can get to know other MPs. And so I respect members of Parliament, and I love, and you can make a difference. Even as a backbencher, you can make a difference. Rupert Allison, who I think is speaking at the festival this afternoon at 2 p.m., was an MP with us, and he tried to introduce a private members' bill that didn't get very far. I was lucky enough to introduce the 1994 Marriage Act, which enables weddings to take place in venues other than register offices. And that's because a constituent of mine owned a castle, and she thought, well, why can you have weddings in Chester Cathedral, but not in my small castle? And I thought, well, why not? And so I introduced this legislation. It's become law. It is now, you can get married in all sorts of places, all over this island, in interesting places. You can get married, if you want a civil wedding, that you couldn't do before the 1994 Marriage Act. I have to say, when my wife one day heard me being talked about on local radio as the expert on the Marriage Act, she actually toppled out of her bunk, didn't you? So you can do useful things as an MP. And I'm very excited, and I've been made happy by the fact that our daughter, we have two daughters and a son, and our youngest daughter, Afra, is now the Member of Parliament for Chester, South and Edinburgh. She was elected at the election on the 4th of July. And I think it's wonderful that there are young people, intelligent, bright young people, who want to get involved in politics. It's good life. It's a life of and I ought to add, my daughter has bought all her own clothes. And is beautifully turned out at all times. We did campaign for her. which she wasn't sure that she should let us campaign for her, but we did campaign for her, and I remember, and then I will shut up and we can let other people in. I remember the last Saturday before the election, somewhere on a Saturday afternoon, knocking on a door, handing out the leaflets, and you'll recognize this, a rather belligerent man came to the door, Saturday afternoon, unshaven, still wearing his pajamas, and not properly adjusted either. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Anyway, I put my leaflet out, and I said, I'm hoping you might consider voting for my daughter, sir. And he grabbed the leaflet and said, what's she got to offer then? I said, what has she got to offer? She has to offer integrity and intelligence. He looked at me with a beady eye and said, you sure she's your daughter?
Gyles, thank you. On that happy note, we'll draw the formal part of the meeting to a close. Would anyone here like to ask questions? Have we got some microphones wandering around? Lady there with her hand up. Just put your hand up so I can see you.
Hi, Gyles, over here.
On the left.
Oh, hello.
Hi, I'm the dodgy one with the tiger top. First of all, you're a very prolific writer, and I was just wondering whether you have any interesting writing routines or quirks when you are writing. Just a second aside, just to say thank you for all you did with the Marriage Act, because we're getting married next month.
Oh.
Yes, and it's in a summer house in the countryside.
Yay! Thank you. In the early days after the Marriage Act was passed, people used to send me bits of birthday cake, wedding cake, and occasionally a bottle of champagne. It was, I am actually quite a disciplined writer. I enjoy writing. I enjoy, funnily enough, the peace of writing. I enjoy being quietly in front of the computer. I write onto the computer, and I enjoy that. The prep school that I mentioned earlier, the headmaster was a man called Mr. Stocks, who was a good man. And when I was about 10, he saw each boy in turn to give them advice for life. And the advice he gave me, I think it's just 5 words, but I remember it to this day. It was simply this: Brandreth, remember, busy people are happy people. Busy people are happy people. And I think that's probably why I have lived the life I have led. I've just been a busy person all these years. My wife may say, busy fool. But the truth is, busy people are happy people. So I like to have a project on the go. And I do usually, I've written a book a year for many, many years. And sometimes there are big books, like Breaking the Code or Elizabeth. And sometimes there are fun books, like Prose and Cons, the English language in just a minute. So I vary it. Some require a lot of research, and some of them come straight from here. But essentially, I get to the desk relatively early, 8:30, 9, and I must do 1,000 words a day. And I can't stop until I've done the 1,000 words. If you do what I do, is a varied life. On Monday and Friday, I tend to be on This Morning, television program. I then do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at the desk writing the book. On that first day, it may be 500 or 800 words. The second day can be 1,000 or 1,200. But you've just got to do it. As Mark Twain said, the secret of writing a book is application, applying the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. There is no other way of doing it. People who say, oh, I'm thinking of writing a book, don't think about it, do it. Until you've done it, don't talk about it. That is my essential rule. And if you think you've written a book that's good and fun, that you wrote it initially for the grandchildren, go to a bookshop, particularly Medina in the high street here, and find books that are comparable to the one you think you've written. And then see who the publishers are. People say, oh, what should I do with my book now? Well, actually, find out who are the publishers who are publishing books similar to the ones you have written, and then take it from there. Are you writing a book at the moment? That's what I thought. How's it going? What is it? Is it 50 Shades of... Oh. Oh, lovely. I adore Lewis Carroll. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gar and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome wraths out. Isn't it wonderful that we have in our heads this rattlebag of poetry from our childhood? So has it got comic verse in it?
Of writing in it. So, yeah, it's quirky, shall we say.
Eclectic and quirky, two of my favourite words that feature in Prose Cons. Before we end, when we end, remind me, I've got a poem I want to recite for this lady. What is your name?
Okay.
Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Rebecca. One of my favourite novels, too, by the great Daphne du Maurier. She wrote such good books, like Mr. Kipling. Anyway.
And any more questions? Any more questions? Yes, chap at the... Is it? I can't see. Yes, it's a chap, right? There's a microphone coming over to you on your left.
And do be careful nowadays, Richard. I know you're out of politics now, but saying there's a chap asking, just because he's dressed like one doesn't mean to say he is one. Just get with the programme.
I'll go with first impressions, actually.
You mentioned that English is the most widely spoken second language. I'm curious as to what you think about how that happened. Is it because the Americans speak it as a first language, or because the Indians speak it as a second language?
It's because of the way that English began, as you're rightly saying, the British language, then spread across what was the British Empire and then became the Commonwealth. I'm now fascinated by the Commonwealth. I do a podcast with my daughter, Afra, the MP, called the Commonwealth Poetry Podcast, and we visit the 56 different nations of the Commonwealth. I want to know, I do want to reassure the island of the Isle of Wight, you're not going the way of Chagos. We are... No. I mean, honestly, I know they're signing away anything now. They're desperate. They're desperate for money to fill the mythical 20 billion. They want anything. But we are going to, Richard and I, Joe and the other amusing MP with the fish and chip shop, we are going to person the barricades, and we're going to ensure that you are kept safe as part of the United Kingdom. That is my pledge to you. But, so the point is, you think of the British Empire, then the British Commonwealth, and you think of the United States of America, and you find that the English language naturally spread across the world. Places like India are hugely populous. So that's really how it began, and it has gone on from there. More people speak English, what I should have said, as a second language than... It used to be most people who spoke English spoke it as a first language. They still do, but actually the number of people speaking it as a second language has gone up because people have found it simply useful. And that's fantastic for us. I mean, what a commercial advantage to have this language, that we speak. We don't need to speak any of these other languages that,
I think we've got to draw it to draw stumps. I'm afraid so.
Pull stumps? We've just got going. Now look, what's going to happen? I'm going to start my
story you want to tell.
Yeah.
Then you've got to do your poem.
Oh, you want to ask me one question before the poem?
I have. Well, does anyone else have one more question? Yeah. Okay. The chap. The person who's now got the microphone.
In under a minute, tell us your one great regret.
That this session wasn't booked for 2 hours. But one of the things that I learnt from the Duke of Edinburgh was, and it's interesting, I'm a trustee of something called the Queen's Reading Room. And this is Queen Camilla's project to encourage people to read. It's a wonderful, for the joy of reading, as well as for the value of it, she made a speech. Michelle and I hosted a party for Queen Camilla's 75th birthday a couple of years ago. And at it, she made a speech. She doesn't really like making speeches, but at it, she nailed her colours to the mast. And she said that her approach to her coming life was to be that of the Duke of Edinburgh. Basically, look up, look out, say less, do more, get on with the job. And If you look up and look out and you're looking forward, then you don't have time for regrets. Of course, there must be many regrets, things that one is embarrassed by, ashamed of, things you wish you'd done in a different way. But what's the point of that? Nothing. So I don't really believe in regrets. I believe in moving forward. And I believe that in a moment we're going to have an extraordinary, you remember, any of you old enough to remember Billy Graham? This is going to be like an evangelical afternoon. Forget Alpha. This is something special. I'm going to go into a room out there. There's going to be a long line of people. And don't worry. I hope there's going to be a long line of people. If there isn't, there isn't. I might tell my story about the long line of people.
I think I've been pushed to wrap it up.
Oh, fine.
I'm sorry.
Oh, wow.
So would you like to do your poem?
I'll do my poem. And then I might tell you later, the next session. It's a very funny story about being in a long line, but we haven't got time for that because there's more films to sign before the festival is over. So I'm going to do my poem, but there'll be a long line. Do feel free to come forward. I'd be happy to sign any book that you like, and if there's time, we can take selfies, anything you want. I'm not taking the escape boat until 4:10. So I've got until then. But the poem, yes, I was going to do a poem. Because seriously, the reason we are here, and I do salute the Isle of Wight Festival. I think it's wonderful that it's existed and it's thrived in the way it has. And I think it's particularly wonderful, the number of volunteers who make this thing happen. And the reason that we do this, the reason you do this, is because of books. Books really are important. Books are our friends. They really are the only friend you can rely on. That's what we're celebrating here. Not just the joy of reading, but actually the physical object of a book. You can take a book anywhere. You can take a book down to the beach. You can take a book on the bus. You can take a book on the catamaran back to... You can take a book anywhere, on the train. You can go to lunch at Costa, you can put a book up, you can have a cup of coffee, and you can read a book. A book is the friend you can rely on. As my wife often reminds me, men, they are unreliable. They either, run off with the au pair or the secretary, or they die on you. On the long run, you can't rely on a man, but you can rely on a book. Ladies and gentlemen, you can go to bed with a book and not wake up with a sexually transmitted disease. So, I'm going to end with a short poem that celebrates our best friends, which are our books, and the Isle of Wight Festival, which celebrates books. And I'm learning poems by heart, and I'm interested in your children's book and your love of Lewis Carroll. I love limericks, popularised, of course, by Edward Lear, almost a contemporary of Lewis Carroll's. The limerick I'm learning at the moment is quite a good one. It goes like this. There was a young man from Peru whose limerick stopped at line 2. But the poem I'm going to recite for you is 4 lines. And for me, it sums up the special nature of this extraordinary festival on this remarkable island, and the pleasure for me of seeing again my old friend Richard and Nikki. It's lovely for me to be with old friends. And this is a poem about friends, and friends that can be people and can be books, by Hilaire Belloc. From quiet homes and first beginning, out to the undiscovered ends, there's nothing worth the wear of winning but laughter and the love of friends. Thank you for your laughter, and here's to the friendship that's to be found at this fabulous festival. Thank you. Oh.
More.